Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be speaking at this important conference organized by Carnegie India and the MEA. It was almost 6 years ago when I introduced in India's parliament our first Privacy and Data Protection Bill. It was a private member's bill and was followed by government bill, which went through several iterations until we passed it this year. And the topic of today's discussion on our DPDP Act, the Data Protection Act, and how the Global South is dealing with these privacy and data protection issues, I think comes at a very interesting time, because in these past 6 years, since I first engaged with this topic in some depth, a lot of water has flown through the Ganga. At that time, the only alternatives when you looked at regulatory frameworks was, at one extreme, the US system, which was very loosely regulated. At the other extreme, you had China, which was already the world's largest walled garden, creating its own ecosystem, its own innovation. The GDPR was still relatively new and was an animal that was still being understood by most actors. And that was at a time when India was already emerging from our past, where we'd been a follower when it came to regulations. We had not felt ourselves confident enough to, in fact, take a leading role in regulations, especially of a technological nature, which had a global impact. But subsequently, a lot has changed, like I said. In the case of India, there was the Sri Krishna Committee, followed by a monumental Supreme Court judgment on privacy, and then, like I said, the many iterations before we got where we are today. In this time, India has now more than 750 million internet users. And in little over a year, that is expected to cross 900 million. India has also demonstrated to the world its capabilities, not just on the tech side. I mean, if you look at what has happened with the India stack, with the biometrics, with digital payments, these are all cutting edge. And these are all where India is redefining the need of regulation, and also has developed the confidence to not wait for others to take the lead, but to start to help shape the global landscape when it comes to regulations concerning privacy and data protection. India has also become the fastest growing large economy in the world, is a country that aids many nations, particularly during the time of the pandemic, thereafter economically and financially, and has emerged as a champion of the Global South in many of these areas which are cutting edge, especially having to do with technology, where many nations share the same kind of diffidence that we used to have. Now, if you look at nations that are part of what is called the Global South, one of the areas where there's a lot of action, there's lots of growth, there's lots of technological innovation that's being put to use, Africa comes to mind. Now, there are nations in Africa, and including one of my co-panelists later on in this session, Kenya, for instance, that has taken a leading step. But these are still dependent on modeling either the GDPR or some such to implement their own policy landscape, regulatory landscape. Now, as I said, India has developed the confidence to not just roll out the technology, but to help shape the regulatory environment. And this, because we are the largest democracy, is done in an open environment, which is why the government bill, which went through so many iterations, was because of consultations with various stakeholders, with industry, with activists, with users, with innovators, with startups, with entrepreneurs. And so many, and I would dare say almost all stakeholders' concerns have been addressed. So the DPDP Act, which has been passed in India, is already beginning to get notice and beginning to get not just acknowledgement, but support and praise by several countries. Norway, for instance, South Africa, for instance, find it as a role model that can be emulated. Now, this is not something that has always got the attention that it deserves. Now, starting from the time when I started engaging with the subject, consent has always been a very key part of managing privacy and managing data security. But, you know, consent in the 21st century, in this rapidly moving technological era, is something very different from an earlier era when, you know, whether it was a medical procedure or it was a large or a financial investment, you'd have to go through dozens and dozens of pages and perhaps have a discussion with people where you gave your consent or you didn't give your consent. But in the digital era, you have to have new methodologies, new mechanisms to deal with consent. And we can discuss more about this in the panel discussion which follows. But as I said, one of the key areas where India has I think started to set an example for other, even major regulatory environments, is in the manner in which we manage consent. And one of the aspects of the Act is to have designated authorities, particularly for large organizations that deal with data, so that the consent process can be both expedited as well as not compromised. These transformations, these changes have started happening beyond just the examples that I gave. It's not just Norway, which I think it's important that a developed European nation like Norway finds the Indian Act worth emulating. And there are many other nations with which India has started cooperating and collaborating. So we've signed agreements already with countries like Armenia, with Sierra Leone, with Suriname, with Barbados, Trinidad and Tobago, and we can go on with several others. So as I said, this represents the kind of championing of the capabilities of the Global South from our own experience in having transitioned or having now transitioning into this new position where we are helping to help set the rules, make the rules. Prime Minister Modi has led from the front. He himself is an avid follower of technology. Himself is an avid champion of technology. And one of the ideas that he has championed is to set up a social impact fund to implement digital public infrastructure in countries that belong to the Global South. So these are some of the areas where India has changed a lot in little more than half a decade. When we talk about data privacy and security, and especially about localization and cross-border flows of data, these are some of the contentious issues that we have to deal with. And there aren't any pat answers. You could perhaps take the view that the US, with its more lenient regulatory environment, is worth emulating. But there are challenges that nations face that the US doesn't face. The kind of terrorism challenges that we face. The kind of organized crime at scales which are unimaginable to some, require different kinds of approaches to deal with them. So yes, it's true that India doesn't believe in a laissez-faire, unregulated environment for cross-border flows of data and with responsibilities to be given. But our emphasis in our act is limited to transactions happening in India or principles being in India. And if you look at some of the other environmental regulatory environment, for example, Singapore, a smaller country, but also one that has set, it's always been at the cutting edge of technology and regulations. It also has, a part of its act says that the cross-border flows of data can be more unlimited, can be more relaxed with other jurisdictions that have the same kind of standards that Singapore has. Now, this could be one way of looking at the ongoing evolution of the regulations. So today, we have the US, we have GDPR, we have China, we have other nations, smaller ones, that have many aspects of regulations which are worth considering. But indeed, today we have India, which has the scale that is almost unmatched. We have the openness that nobody else has at this size. And we have already developed a track record of both implementing technologies and adapting our regulations to meet the needs of the current decade and the current century. Thank you.